losing internet access, we're losing the ability to communicate effectively with each other, with the communities that we serve. In the next day or so, if we don't have fuel, we are going to lose functioning of 5 Ministry of Health hospitals, 5 field hospitals, almost 30 ambulances, 70 primary healthcare centers run by UNRWA and other partners, and 10 mobile clinics providing immunization, trauma care, and malnutrition services, as well as 23 medical facilities in Al Mawasi, which, as you know, is where hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have sought shelter. Any kind of meaningful safe water production in Rafah has already stopped. Facilities have to be maintained at their lowest levels just to ensure that they're not destroyed by full stoppage, which would require weeks to begin again. In terms of the food, we have to say that the World Food Programme in UNRWA will run out of food for distribution in the south by tomorrow. That means that people will be left only with what has already been distributed in their shelters, in their homes, and on site. As of today, we have 12 bakeries supported by humanitarian partners here in South Gaza. 8 have ceased to operate due to lack of fuel in stock, and the 4 that are still operating at reduced capacities will be out of that stock by Monday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Georgios. And indeed, Jens, who's with us here on the podium, will share these figures with you. We're going to turn immediately to another colleague joining us from Rafah, from UNICEF, Hamish Young, who's UNICEF's Senior Emergency Coordinator in the Gaza Strip. Hamish, over to you.
Good morning, thank you, and greetings from Rafah here in Gaza. I've been working on large-scale humanitarian emergencies for the best part of the last 30 years, and I've never been involved in a situation as devastating, complex, or erratic as this. When I arrived in Gaza in the middle of November, I was shocked by the severity of the impact of this conflict on children, and impossibly, it has continued to worsen since then. Yesterday, I was walking around the Al Mawasi zone that people in Rafah are being told to move to. More than 100,000 people have fled Rafah in the last 5 days, and the stream of displacement continues. The roads to Al Mawasi are jammed. Many hundreds of trucks, buses, cars, donkey carts, you name it. They're loaded with people and possessions. In fact, I was almost late for this briefing because I was held up in that human traffic. And on the way in today, I saw someone trying to move their latrine, their temporary makeshift latrine on the back of a donkey cart. I think this gives you some idea of just how desperate the people are. Shelters already lined Al Mawasi sand dunes, and it's now becoming difficult to move between the mass of tents and tarpaulins. People I speak with tell me they are absolutely exhausted. They're terrified, and they know life in Al Mawasi will, again, almost impossibly be harder. Families lack proper sanitation facilities, they lack drinking water, and they lack shelter. People are making improvised toilets by digging holes in the ground around groups of tents. Open defecation is on the rise. Georgios just gave us some striking numbers on the lack of access to hospitals and health centres. And as we know, displaced people are subject to even greater risk of disease, infections, malnutrition, particularly children, dehydration, and they're also subject to other protection and additional health concerns. Beyond a few mobile health points and field hospitals with limited capacity, the closest hospital is at least 4 kilometres away, and that's assuming the road is even safe to use. In Gaza, almost everyone has now been displaced more than once, some many times, and as a result, they're at even greater risk. Yesterday, I was talking to someone who was packing up their family just outside the coordination centre where we are now. And one of the father told me that he had nothing other than bad options to choose from. And as he was telling me where he was going, he started sobbing, then his children started crying, then they started asking me what to do. It's just a tragic situation, and there's nowhere safe in Gaza for children. All that said, impossibly, again, it will worsen further if humanitarian operations are not revised in the next 24 to 48 hours. Again, as Georgios just said, for 5 days, no fuel and virtually no humanitarian aid has entered the Gaza Strip. and we are scraping the bottom of the barrel. This is already a huge issue for the population and for all humanitarian actors, but in a matter of days, if this is not corrected, the lack of fuel will really grind the whole humanitarian operation to a halt. Without fuel, the maternity wards, for example, in Emirati Hospital cannot function. And this is while approximately 80 babies are born there every day. Pregnant women are left without options for safe delivery of their newborns. As we've seen in other parts of Gaza over the last 7 months, when hospitals ran out of fuel, life-saving equipment such as ventilators and incubators stopped working. And there's not even enough incubators to go around at the moment. I was in a hospital last week and every incubator had 2, if not 3, newborn babies in it. Without fuel, the water desalination plants, which are only running at 20 to 30% capacity anyway, cannot function. The water wells can't function. The sewage system, degraded as it is, cannot operate at all. And our trucks cannot bring the critical life-saving humanitarian aid to the people in need. Food stocks to support the people in the south are expected to run out in the coming days, and the last functioning bakery in the south is about to run out of fuel. At a time when people are being forced to pick up and move again, life-saving supplies that sustain and support them have been entirely cut off. So let's be very clear, this will result in children dying. These are deaths of children that can and must be prevented. And then there are families that cannot leave Rafah or choose to stay. Hundreds of thousands of children are injured, sick, malnourished, or have a pre-existing disability. Over 14,000 children have reportedly been killed already in this conflict. A ground offensive in Rafah will undoubtedly result in this number increasing dramatically. Even the air offensive is killing people already. One of our colleagues at the WHO lost a 7-year-old niece 2 days ago. I've spent a lot of time in Gaza's remaining hospitals, and the injuries I've witnessed are excruciating. It's very hard to describe the impact of modern high-tech weaponry on a 4-year-old. What it does to a young body is just beyond comprehension. I've seen firsthand many children who've lost limbs, who've suffered horrific burns, these type of injuries. And of course, the impact on the mental health of all children in the Gaza Strip is terrible, and it's getting worse. Those of us who are working here are doing everything we can to keep the humanitarian response alive. We remain hopeful our calls for a ceasefire will be heard and acted on, but we are also braced for this senseless conflict to continue to shock even the most seasoned of us. We need fuel immediately, aid must flow, hostages must be freed, Rafah must not be invaded, and children must be protected, not killed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamish. Now over to Margaret from the World Health Organization for an update as well on Gaza.
And thank you very much to my colleague from UNICEF for those updates and really bringing to reality what a health system under such threat, under such pressure looks like. We have one bright spot. Our WHO team visited the Nasser Medical Complex yesterday. It's not fully functional, but the work of the health partners in the health cluster, UK Med, MAP UK, MSF France and UNFPA, along with WHO, to get it back up and running. This has just been done within days, weeks, means that they were actually accepting dialysis patients yesterday, and they are also, their laboratory is able to perform some blood tests. It's not anywhere near where it was, but it's coming back. And this was part of a contingency plan to try to see where the hospitals could be made available, functional, if this incursion happened. But, and we have pre-positioned supplies in the various hospitals, field hospitals, medical points. But as has been made absolutely clear, without fuel, all that stops. All the things that a hospital does, all the life-saving treatments no longer can be done. Even if you've got somebody back from the brink, you've operated on them, you've put them on a ventilator, ventilator stops, they no longer breathe. So without fuel, no matter what everybody's done, the whole system collapses. we have distributed fuel to NASA Medical Complex and to other hospitals. We, WHO, are now the distributor of fuel to all hospitals. We've also had to suspend our missions to the north currently to conserve fuel, to try to ensure that we can provide as much fuel as possible to the hospitals in the south to keep them going. And as I said, I think that's it. Also, a team of logisticians were working to repair the sewage system in NASA Medical Center, and that is something that needs to be done throughout the Strip. As my colleague very graphically described, a lack of sewage services, lack of clean water means that if the bombs don't get you, you die of thirst, infectious diseases, or simply hunger.
Thank you very much, Margaret. If you'll indulge me, we'll take questions in a minute, but I'm just going to read out a tweet that was put out last night from UNRWA on behalf of UNRWA's Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini. The tweet is as follows: "This evening, Israeli residents set fire twice to the perimeter of the UNRWA headquarters in the occupied East Jerusalem. And this took place while UNRWA and UN agency staff were on the compound. While there were no casualties among the staff, the fire caused extensive damage to outdoor areas. The UNRWA headquarters has on its grounds a petrol and diesel station for the agency's fleet of cars." Now, the director of UNRWA, with the help of other staff, had put out the fire themselves, as it took the Israeli fire extinguishers and police a while before they turned up. A crowd accompanied by armed men were witnessed outside the compound chanting, "Burn down the United Nations." This is an outrageous development. Once again, the lives of UN staff were at a serious risk. In light of this second appalling incident, in less than a week, the Commissioner General has taken the decision to close down the compound until proper security is restored. Over the past 2 months, I should mention that the Israeli extremists have been staging protests outside their UNRWA compound in Jerusalem, called by an elected member of the Jerusalem municipality. The tweet continues. This week, the protest became violent when demonstrators threw stones at the UN staff in the buildings of the compound. Over the past months, UN staff have been regularly subjected to harassment and intimidation. The UNRWA compound has been seriously vandalized and damaged. On several occasions, Israeli extremists threatened staff with guns. UN, of course, it is a responsibility of the state of Israel as an occupying power to ensure the United Nations personnel and facilities are protected at all times. UN staff premises and operations should be protected at all times in line with international law. Lastly, the UNRWA Commissioner General calls on all who have influence to put an end to these attacks and hold all those responsible accountable. The perpetrators of these attacks must be investigated, and those responsible must be held accountable. Anything less will set a dangerous standard. And of course, that's the end of the tweet. Of course, this illustrates that our colleagues, of course, in Gaza are at a risk. We've lost many humanitarian colleagues. We've lost nearly 190 of our UNRWA staff, as we've reported here. It's not just in Gaza where we are under attack. So this is something that we really wanted to emphasize, the need for accountability, the need for these intimidations and attacks to end. So I'll turn over to you, colleagues, for your questions. And if you could kindly indicate who you want to point your question to, we'll start off right away for any in the room. And then we'll turn to the platform. Okay, we have a question from Mohammed of Andalu. Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Rolando. My question for OCHA, Jens or other guy can reply it. After the Israeli attack, almost 110,000 people fled Rafah for safety, as you well know. My question is, where these forcibly displaced people go, is this a number expected to increase rapidly? And does United Nations have any aid plan for these people? Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Georgios?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. So we've seen since the attack, we've seen on average about 30,000 people leaving Rafah every day. They move from Rafah city towards the coast, or they move north into the governorates of Khan Yunis or Deir al-Balah, or what we call the middle area. Um, they add to the numbers of the displaced there. So these areas already have displaced numbers in the hundreds of thousands. The humanitarian system has prepared through some pre-positioning of supplies and moving of field hospitals and preparation of primary health care. The problem is that at present, and when this new operation started here in the south, we simply have no tents, we have no blankets, no bedding, none of the items that you would expect the population on the move to be able to get from a humanitarian system. As I've already explained, also with the lack of incoming supplies, what we will need for an increasing number of displaced, the displacing number is not stopping, and as fighting moves into more urban areas of Rafah, we do expect it to increase daily. So that means that we don't have supplies for the newly displaced, and we will be running out, as we said, not just for them, but for those that we were already trying to help. It's going to be a very critical time as we welcome people into new displacement sites with nothing in our hands. Thanks.
Thank you, Georgios. Okay, we'll take a question out from Gunilla Van Hal of Svenska Dagbladet. Gunilla.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I have several questions. I'm trying to understand, does this mean there's no way at all now to get humanitarian aid into Rafah? There were reports about Israel opening up one crossing the other day, so I just want to understand if it's completely isolated. And then I wanted to know, what about patients in the hospitals? Are there any chances they can be evacuated? How many are waiting to be evacuated? There were also reports about, with the heat now increasing, there are diseases, there is a lot of problems with sanitation. What kind of health issues, diseases are you having? And Margaret, you mentioned too that people were, lack of food and lack of thirst, people could die from that. Do you have any reports so far of people who actually have died from lack of food or lack of water? Thank you so much. Sorry for many questions.
No, thank you, Gunilla. These are important questions. Maybe Georgios, we'll start with you and then go to Margaret after.
Sure, thank you. If you remember, and I think this is a very ironic turn of events, for months since the start of the year, the UN and partners were trying to use two routes of supply from South Gaza to the north of Gaza through two Israeli checkpoints to feed 250, 300,000. We don't have a perfect number for the people that remain in North Gaza. And we were very, very unsuccessful in trying to make everyone safe, have enough food and have access to health. We simply couldn't do it for 300,000 people, which led to malnutrition and the information that we've already shared around the hunger issues there and the risk of that situation becoming worse. Now, with the crossings in Rafah all closed, we have Erez crossing in North Gaza, which continues to be able to bring humanitarian supplies, mainly food. We are left with one crossing, increasingly dangerous, insecure, and inefficient, not a meaningful humanitarian route for the volume of needs that we are increasingly seeing for the approximately 2 million people in Gaza that live south of the Wadi, and who are increasingly in desperate need for food, water, dignity, and shelter. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yes, on the patients, nobody's coming in or out. So anybody needing evacuation, and indeed, I think the numbers I have are about 9,000 people actually need evacuation. And when we look at in the past, when we've had patients waiting to be evacuated, when you look at the lists, quite often the percentage of those approved and those who get out is different because they die while waiting to be evacuated. But at the moment, nobody is coming in, nobody's coming out. That's the real problem. On the malnutrition, we don't have good numbers. We don't have numbers about what people are dying of. We know that at least 30 people did die of malnutrition and dehydration. Those are recorded numbers, but it doesn't give you any idea of what's happening right now. What I can tell you, though, is our stabilization centers, our severe acute malnutrition stabilization centers, which, by the way, didn't exist before this conflict, but now we've set up 2 in the south and 1 in the north. They are full of patients. I think the numbers I have are 55 patients in the north, the 55 patients totally, 40 in the north and 15 in the south. But again, all those centers are dependent on having the supplies, having the fuel, having the means to keep going.
Exactly. Okay. Yuri from RIA Novosti.
Yes, thank you, Rolando, and thank you for the briefing. My question is for the colleagues of OCHA and other agencies that are in Rafah right now. Do you feel aggressivity towards you by the Gazans because of the impossibility for the UN to change the situation? Do you feel a frustration against you by the local people? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll maybe start with you, Georgios, and Hamish, feel free to chime in as well. Georgios.
Yeah, thank you. I've been doing this a long time, and I've never been in a place where I felt so safe among the population. People still smile at you. I think it means a lot to them in the situation that they found themselves in months ago, the increasingly dire circumstances now so pronounced with the closing of Rafah fully to the world, that aid workers and humanitarian staff remain here with them. We have to be very clear that we're their neighbors. We live next to them. We share the same water. We talk on the same cell phone towers, and we are subject to the same shelling from air, land, and sea. So I think I don't feel that. What I think is very specifically an issue is what we're seeing in the street, which is increasing violence between them for reduced space that they believe is safe, and for reduced commodities, wood with which to build their rudimentary shelters, food, fuel, and other supplies, children's shoes, clothing, hygiene products, and sundry household items that they simply don't exist, and some of them are even being withheld by merchants speculating on price increase. So it's not some kind of risk of violence or some kind of changing mood against people that are here and trying to help and showing solidarity, but it is a society in a very, very slow breakdown.
Thanks, Georgios. Hamish?
Not much really to add to what Georgios said, just to reiterate that we feel, all of us feel very personally, very comfortable here. I'm quite happy to walk out. I leave my car parked some distance away, quite happy to walk through the crowds. People are friendly, welcoming. When I was stuck in the traffic earlier today, people were helping clear donkey carts out of the way, that type of thing. No, the situation remains very welcoming, very warm and welcoming towards us. Thanks.
Thank you both. Okay, we'll take a question now from Nick Cumbers of the New York Times. Nick?
Yeah, thank you for taking the question. This is for Georgios or anybody else who wishes to contribute. We understood that Israel took control of Rafah crossing. So I wondered if you could just give us an update. I mean, is there a large military presence, tanks, armored vehicles, or whatever, actually at Rafah that will be obstructing any aid coming through? You've also talked about continuing bombing. I mean, how intense is that still at the moment? We heard that it was there had been some attacks on Western Rafah, but are these the areas that you're seeing routinely targeted? And what is the proximity of bombing to Al-Mawasi, which is supposed to be a safe zone? And one final question, what are the conversations going on with COGAT at this point about restoring the entry of humanitarian assistance? What are you being told can come or when it might happen? Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Maybe Georgios.
Yeah, thanks. I think on Rafah crossing, thank you for the question. On Rafah crossing, we assessed it. There is military presence along the corridor from along both crossings from Karma Salem to Rafah. I think to be clear, we don't necessarily believe that the presence of party to this conflict is going to obstruct aid necessarily or physically, but even if there were assurances to us being able to pass through a corridor, the proximity so close to a military involved in fighting is just not acceptable for something that has to be a humanitarian zone. That's certainly for any route where supplies go. For a crossing that then has to open to civilians and to aid workers, of course, we'd also be looking for a crossing that is safe, that has the infrastructure, the support and the services available to people to safely go in and out. So for the time being, as I said before, for us, we don't see it viable. And then maybe I'll link to the on the COGAT, the government of Israel. I think we're exploring all options. There's clear understanding that people, fuel, and supplies have to come back to Rafah and to Gaza in general. Any crossing will do. It's not these crossings only, as we've always called. Any way to get these three very specific things into Gaza, people, fuel, and commodities, to help, will be welcome. And I think the urgency is understood. The bombings continue to fall. They've always fallen all over Rafah. There's no real area where there's no shelling or airstrikes. In general, what we're seeing is that they are increasingly closer to Mawasi or Tal al-Sultan area of Rafah, where I am, within 1 kilometer to 800 meters from the Joint Humanitarian Operations Cell from which I'm talking to you. And therefore, you could say in the last 4 or 5 days, they are moving closer also to the coast, to al-Mawasi, to where we have hundreds of thousands of displaced along the beach.
Thanks, Georgios. Hamish, you have your hand up. Do you want to add something?
Only to add that since we've been online and speaking this morning, I got a message popped up that the younger brother of one of our colleagues and a friend of mine was killed in an airstrike a couple of hours ago this morning. So in answer to Nick's question, yes, it's very much still going on. It's very real.
Thank you, Hamish, and of course, our condolences to your colleague and your friend. Christian, German News Agency.
Thank you, Rolando. I was going to ask you also about contacts with the authorities. Can you describe to us what exactly is happening with Hamas as well as the Israelis? Do you get information directly about evacuations? Do you get advance notice? In other words, do you know today what is going to come tomorrow? And are you also still coordinating in any way with the Hamas authorities? Thank you.
Either one of either Georgios or Hamish who wants to take that? I think either of you are perhaps.
I can start.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, please.
We get evacuation orders from the Israeli military through very particular channels, as the United Nations, which we then share in the system, the humanitarian system. But the evacuation orders have also gone out to the people of Gaza through social media, Facebook and Twitter and so on. They've gone out through leaflets that are passed. And I can say also that the recent evacuation orders here in East Rafah also included direct phone calls, I think, to civilians that were asked to evacuate their neighborhoods and their homes. We continue to engage the parties to the conflict for safe access, for secure humanitarian supply, for secure humanitarian routes from north to south, from south to south. And for the understanding that every single humanitarian worker and protected sites should be respected, should be neutral and remain a place of safety for the aid workers and the people that reach them for our services. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgios. We have a question from Lisa Schlein, the Voice of America. Lisa?
Thank you, Orlando. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'd like to get your impression about President Biden has said that he would suspend arms shipments to Israel if the operation, the incursion into Rafah, goes ahead. How important is this, do you think? Netanyahu seems to have dissed that situation and said he's going to go ahead anyway. Are you fearful that the U.S. has perhaps lost any kind of influence that it has had upon Israel, and that it can do anything about this? Or do you believe that it might have some kind of an influence upon the operation? Thank you. And if everybody would please send us the notes as soon as possible, because there's so much material to digest. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if maybe Georgios, any thoughts on that?
I think from the beginning, every single way that we can to avoid an operation in Rafah, to avoid a military incursion or a battle in the last part of Gaza that's left standing physically from the beginning. The last part where we have, I think, anything approaching meaningful humanitarian assets and infrastructure has to be looked at. We have to stop. We have to stop this at all costs. The system that we have had to deal with, the system that we're trying to use to bring aid to more than 2 million people, is profoundly not fit for that purpose in its current form. Any further attack will render it, I think, beyond the pale, something we've never really seen, and I think that question really has to be put on the table. We have to put people first. We have to make sure that in this war, like all wars, but specifically on this one, where people really cannot reach places of safety, we talk about people first and what has been done to them, what is continuing to be done to them, and how fast we can end it for everyone here being affected by the war, including the hostages. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Georgios. Okay. We do have a question now from Robin Millard of Agence France Presse Online. Go ahead, Robin.
Thank you. I've got a question for Margaret on another topic, but I can come back to that. On Gaza, have you been told anything about when fuel might be able to come in? Have you been given any promises or guarantees? And secondly, on the patients in the hospitals which are set to run out of fuel within a day or two, how many patients are actually being treated in those hospitals? Thank you.
Maybe on the first question of the fuel, either, I guess Georgios may be best placed there.
Yeah, thanks. It's a short one. We have had attempts every day. They've fallen short either because of the very complicated logistical bringing fuel to Gaza and the security situation in Gaza. So it could be tomorrow, could be the day after. But I think it's very clear that everyone wants us to work. There is an understanding that the fuel has to come in. Again, it's not something that should be a one-off. It has to come in the volume we need, and it has to come in every day, and it has to come in safely. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, Margaret, on the hospitals?
So we're talking about fuel for hospitals throughout the Gaza Strip, remember. This is not simply only in the south. Now, we know that there were 500 beds added through the work of the emergency medical teams and the field hospitals, and another 1,500 beds were available, but all the hospitals are massively overcrowded. So if I would have to add thousands more of patients. So we're really looking at thousands. I can't give you a clear number, but you're talking about thousands of people today, but also the thousands of people who need help tomorrow and the next day and the day after. So destroying the access to healthcare is absolutely catastrophic, really, for everyone.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Okay, I think we've exhausted the questions on Gaza, unless there are any last hands going up. No, I don't see that's the case. So I'd like to extend my profound thanks to both of you, Georgios and Hamish. Stay safe and thank you very much for this ever important briefing. So, and of course, do join us again. I think there was a question for you, Margaret, from Robin on a different subject. So, Robin, if you want to pose that question now, please do so.
Thank you. Yes, on the pandemic agreement talks, what's the latest situation there? Can you give us an update on where the talks are at, and perhaps the likelihood of whether an agreement can be concluded on time today? Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I do have an update on that. The current round of negotiations by WHO member states on a proposed pandemic agreement will end later today. During the past 2 weeks, negotiators have held extensive discussions on multiple aspects of the proposed agreement, meeting often into the early hours of the morning. I pity them. The member states are still continuing their discussions today to make as much progress as possible. Next steps on the way forward will also be discussed today, and they will be announced later today. So we will let you know when we know. As previously decided by member states in 2021, the World Health Assembly, which, as you know, happens at the end of this month, will consider the outcome of the negotiating body process. So that's what I have currently.
Thanks for that update, Margaret. Any further questions for Margaret before we relieve her? Okay. Well, thank you again, as ever, Margaret. I'm going to call William Spindler of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who's going to address the floods in Brazil. And maybe while William is making his way up here, I'll just remind you of the statement that we did share with you yesterday from the Secretary General, through which he expressed that he's deeply saddened by the loss of lives and the damage caused by heavy rains and flooding in the south of Brazil. He extended his condolences and solidarity to the government and people of Brazil, as well as to the families of the victims. And Secretary General also noted that disasters such as this are indeed a reminder of the devastating effects of the climate crisis on lives and livelihoods. So that statement is in your inbox as of yesterday. Over to you, William, for an update from UNHCR.
Thank you, Rolando. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is working with federal, state, and municipal authorities, as well as partner organizations in Brazil, to mitigate the severe impact of the extreme weather events, including heavy rains, strong winds, and cold, that have devastated areas of Brazil's southern state of Rio Grande do Sul. Massive floods, in particular, have killed at least 107 people and affected more than 1.7 million, according to official figures. Another 134 people are reported missing. Those affected include some 41,000 refugees and other people in need of international protection, including many Venezuelans and Haitians who live in affected areas, some of which can only be reached by boat. In coordination with local authorities, UNHCR is distributing relief items such as blankets and mattresses, assessing the needs of the affected population, and providing technical support to facilitate the communication with the impacted communities so that refugees and migrants have access in their own language to the official information about protection recommendations and risks associated with the places where they live. In the coming days, UNHCR will be supporting the issuance of lost and damaged documentation to refugees and asylum seekers to guarantee they can access social benefits and public services. The agency will also strengthen local teams of civil society partners to provide psychosocial support and respond to most vulnerable cases, including among host communities. Additional relief items such as emergency shelters, kitchen sets, blankets, solar lamps, and hygiene kits are being mobilized from different UNHCR humanitarian stocks in the region to be delivered to Brazil, once logistical arrangements are confirmed. Supplementary items will also be delivered from UNHCR's stockpile in the north of Brazil. According to government data, Rio Grande do Sul is the state which received the third largest number of Venezuelans relocated from Roraima, at the country's northern border with Venezuela, hosting more than 21,000 since April 2018. The incidence of extreme weather events has been frequent and more devastating in recent years in Brazil, involving droughts in the Amazon region and severe rains in different locations, such as Bahia and Acre states, of which UNHCR had also supported. UNHCR estimates $3.21 million is needed to support the most urgent needs, including direct financial assistance to affected individuals and the provision of essential relief items, as the impact of the climate events in the state is huge. More than 85% of the state's territory was affected. Around 68,000 people are living in adapted shelters, and more than 327,000 have moved from their houses. New episodes of high-intensity rain and strong gusts of wind could bring new disruptions to Rio Grande do Sul state until this weekend, according to meteorologists. Severe climate events are disproportionately affecting refugees and other people requesting international protection. Funding available to address the impacts of climate change is not sufficient to address the needs of those forcibly displaced, nor the communities hosting them. Without help to prepare for, withstand, and recover for climate-related shocks, they face an increased risk of further displacement. In April 2024, UNHCR launched its first Climate Resilience Fund to reinforce the need to build the resilience of refugees, displaced communities, and their hosts to the increasing intensity of climate change-related extreme weather events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. We have a question for you from Bianca of Global TV. Bianca.
Thanks, Rolando. Yeah, in fact, I have many questions. I will have also a question for Claire later, but I'll start now with William. First, a clarification. The UNHCR is working in Brazil to support only the refugees, or did also extend this support for the local population with the shelters, for example? This is a clarification. But how do you see the Brazilian response to this disaster? Like the authorities, the volunteers, but what else can be done, and how the world could also help Brazil at this point? And a last thing, despite all challenges the state of Rio Grande do Sul is facing, Brazilians are now also having to deal with fake news regarding this tragedy. For example, that the state of Rio Grande do Sul is preventing the entry of trucks with donations because the lack of invoice, things that make any sense. But anyway, how concerned is the UNHCR also with fake news? In which extent can fake news complicate even more the situation there? Thanks a lot.
Thank you for those questions. About the first one, the UNHCR presence in Brazil dates to several decades, and the main purpose of our presence in Brazil is, of course, to help the authorities deal with the arrival of asylum seekers and refugees. So this is our main mandate and the main area of work. But of course, when a situation like this happens, we need to look into how it's affecting also the local population, because after all, in Brazil, like in many parts of Latin America, refugees are living with the local people. They don't live separately. They don't live in refugee camps. So it's the host communities that we support. We work closely with them because we need to strengthen their capacity so that they can continue to host refugees, and that means providing or strengthening social services, access to education, to health for the local people as well as the refugees. So in this case, our response concentrates on those areas that are hosting refugees, because as we heard, the floods are impacting a large number of people. And our response is part of a wider response from the United Nations and other organizations. So we are concentrating and focusing our response on those areas that host refugees. But of course, we are providing assistance to everybody, whether they are refugees or whether they're Brazilian citizens. On the question of fake news, it's a problem, I think, that we face in many parts of the world, not just when there are natural disasters like this, but in many other circumstances, they tend to exacerbate tensions with society. We see in many cases that they target individuals, they promote hatred of people, whether they are from different nationality or different group, or also against LGBT people and so on. So it is a serious concern. It's something that needs to be addressed. It exacerbates already difficult situations. It can also lead to difficulties in providing humanitarian assistance. So this is a major concern, I think, not just in Brazil, but in many parts of the world. And could you remind me what the other question was?
I think maybe, I think those are the two questions I recall, but maybe, is there another one, Bianca? Or are you satisfied with those responses?
Yeah, I asked specifically what else can be done. I asked about the Brazilian response, authorities and volunteers, but what else can be done? Like how the world could also help Brazil at this point, if you can add. Thanks a lot.
Yes, in this case, the response is being led by the local and federal authorities in Brazil. So as I said, our contribution comes within this kind of wider effort by the authorities. So we are helping the authorities. We are not leading in the response, but we are part of a wider response together with other UN organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations, local volunteers, as you said, and of course the authorities, civil defense, and so on. So this is a kind of joint effort in which we participate. Brazil is a country that is prone to natural disasters. So it's very important to work on prevention, and also particularly in those areas that are mostly affected and prone to these situations. And among those populations that are particularly vulnerable, the impact of climate change affects everybody, but some individuals and communities are at a more vulnerable situation, particularly refugees and migrants, because they are not from the country, they come from other countries, and that means that they don't have the same kind of social networks, family, and so on that nationals have. Often they are also living in areas that are more exposed to risk. So they are impacted in a disproportionate way by these events. But of course, these events affect everybody.
Thank you very much, William. And if I may just add, indeed, the Brazilian government is leading the efforts, but on behalf of the UN, we have a resident coordinator in country who's representing UNDP, who's leading the UN team's response. And just to echo what was mentioned at yesterday's briefing, the response includes shipping emergency supplies and monitoring the spread of disease, supporting shelter and related needs, and distributing emergency kits and monitoring children and adolescents, some of whom have been separated from their families, as William just alluded to. On the issue of fake news, I mean, it's just to echo what William said, this is a scourge which is facing us around the globe. And indeed, that's why it's important for you, members of the press, for your accurate reporting to help us contend with this massive amounts of disinformation, which really does not help us in carrying out our jobs. So this is really just a point I wanted to make to echo and to support William's comments. We have a few hands that have gone up still. I know that Claire, you have a question. I'll be pointed to you, but before that, maybe just to go to Maya Plentz. You have a question for William, perhaps.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Rolando. Yes, my question is regarding the number of UNHCR personnel that are deployed now in Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre. By the way, that's my hometown. At those streets I used to walk by as a teenager, so it is quite heartbreaking to see the situation. If you could give me perhaps numbers, if you have, of personnel that has been deployed, because you mentioned that they are also helping the local population.
Thank you for that question, and my condolences to you personally, since your family, friends are directly affected by this tragedy. UNHCR has a number of staff in Brazil, specifically on Rio Grande do Sul. We work through a number of partners that are present on the ground. We work with, for instance, SOS Children's Villages. We also work with the Jesuit Service for Migrants and Refugees, who are present on the ground. So we work through many of these organizations that we help to finance in areas of the reception, integration of refugees and asylum seekers, also local development, protection and assistance. We provide through them protection services and community-based protection. So we are also in contact with refugee-led organizations. So these are organizations by the refugees themselves, who organize themselves to defend their interests, and we support that as well. There are a number of UNHCR partners in the academic world as well. Since you are from that state, you might be aware of the Sergio Vieira de Mello Chair and the Unicinos University, and which is housing around 2,000 families at the moment. So through the efforts of all these partners, we managed to reach a greater number of people.
Thank you very much. We still have a few hands. I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Antonio, in the room. Maybe before we go to you, Antonio, I just see that Maya, is that a quick follow-up to the previous question? That you have your hand still up there?
Yes, thank you very much, Rolando. It's a quick follow-up. It is again, just if you could send us your notes, and also what is the number of refugees? I don't know if you mentioned it before, that the UNHCR was already taking care of, or are they already integrated in the community, or where they living in a separate sort of encampment of sorts? And two is, the number of people you're helping on the on the refugees from Venezuela side, and the number of people you're helping that are now the people from Porto Alegre, the citizens of Porto Alegre.
Thank you, Maya. Yes, I hope that you'll get my my notes soon if you haven't received them yet. And most of this information is there. The numbers of people affected, the number of people that we are assisting, the number of refugees in the state and in the whole of Brazil. But on your question of whether they are separate, located in separate areas, as I said earlier on, in Brazil, as in most of Latin America, there are no separate refugee camps housing refugees. They are living with the host community in the same conditions and in the same type of places as the local community.
Thank you very much. And Claire, I see you there. I haven't forgotten you. I know I think Bianca has a question for you, but before we turn to that, maybe Antonio from Spanish News Agency in the room has a question as well.
Yes,
Antonio.
thank you, Rolando and William. So I think you mentioned that Rio Grande do Sul is the third state that has more refugees from Venezuela and Haiti, I think. Do you know which are the other ones that have important refugee populations? Do you have the numbers? I also would like to know if the UNHCR participates in the decision to allocate these refugees in different states of Brazil, and how is this decided? Because for me, it's curious that Rio Grande do Sul is quite far from Venezuela. So what are the main reasons to choose these states? Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. That's a good question. The state that receives the largest number of Venezuelan refugees is Roraima in the north, which is bordering Venezuela. So you're right, Rio Grande do Sul is very far. But since Roraima for many years has been receiving the bulk of the refugees from Venezuela, and it's a state that is facing several challenges, not least because of its remoteness. The Brazilian government, with the help of UNHCR and other organizations, started a program of moving people from Roraima to other parts of Brazil, to other cities, on a voluntary basis as well, and in coordination with the receiving states or cities, of course. So over 100 cities and towns all over Brazil are part of this scheme. Over 100,000 people have been relocated from Roraima to other parts of Brazil, and when they arrive there, they are provided with accommodation and help to find work so that they can integrate quicker into their new homes. So the idea is to share the responsibility of hosting this large community away from the state that has received the most to other states. I can give you more information about this scheme and send it to you.
Thank you very much, William. Okay, Bianca, back to you. And I think maybe you had a question, maybe both for William and Claire.
Hi, can you hear me again?
Yes,
Yes.
loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thanks again. Yeah, in fact, I have to Claire, and I think three main things. One is Claire just shared with us the latest forecast from the Brazilian Meteorological Service. So how concerned is the WMO with this forecast? A second point, this week we saw the launch of the report on the state of the climate in Latin America last year. And Celeste Saulo said that unfortunately 2023 was a year of record climate hazards in the region. So following what we are seeing in Brazil, is 2024 in the way to be even worse than last year? And last one, Claire, as Rolando just remembered, Antonio Guterres highlighted that disasters like this are a reminder of the devastating effects of the climate crisis. So we know that there are no tools to confirm at this point if this tragedy was or not caused by climate change. We know that, but how likely is that this disaster in Rio Grande do Sul related to global warming? Thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. As you said, the state of the climate in Latin America and the Caribbean, which the World Meteorological Organization released earlier this week, highlighted the vulnerability of the entire region to extreme weather and climate change impacts in 2023. Will 2024 be worse? It's difficult to say at this stage, but obviously if you are in the affected flooded area right now, I mean, from obviously, 2024 for those affected is an absolutely, record-breakingly bad year. And I think what I would like to stress, it's just the size of this. We're talking about a huge area, multiple times of Switzerland. It's not just a local river which has overflowed its banks. It's massive, and it really will, undermine socioeconomic development in that entire area, for a long time to come. Is it related to climate change? We posted a story on our website a couple of days ago saying that, El Nino is obviously playing a major role in the floods in Brazil, as El Nino is in the floods in East Africa. But on top of that, you've got climate change. So as we said in our Latin America report this week, it's a double whammy. It's a double whammy of El Nino and plus climate change. And that's what we're seeing in Brazil right now. Even when El Nino fades, which it will do, the long-term effects of climate change are with us. Every degree or every fraction of a degree in temperature increase means that our weather will become more extreme. Warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, so that's why we are seeing much more, many more extreme rainfall events. Our weather is on steroids, and until we find a cure for it, or until we, stop consuming the greenhouse gases which are driving this extreme weather, we're going to see more floods. We're going to see more extreme floods. We're going to see more intense drought. We're going to see more intense heat waves. And it's something that WMO and Celeste Saula, we're saying it on a daily basis. We really do need climate action, and we need it urgently. And just to underline my point, today on our website, we've just posted a news story to say that April globally was the hottest April on record. Again, it's, we seem to be in a phase of, another month, another record. So we've now had 11 months in a row where it was the hottest month on record. So it was the hottest April on record, it was the hottest March, hottest February, hottest January, etc., etc. For 13 months, sea surface temperatures have been record high. So even longer than the land, the average global surface temperature. That is combination of El Nino, but it's also climate change. It's a very, very strong climate change signal. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Claire, and thank you for flagging that latest update on April. We're back with Maya, and then Bianca also has a question, so maybe starting with Maya.
Yes, thank you, Rolando, for taking my question. The question is for Claire. If I could have the copy of the report in Spanish that you issued this week, the report you issued this week regarding Latin America, and also how is WMO involved in any way in supporting the Brazilian government, and in particular the state of Rio Grande do Sul government in this moment?
Okay. So yes, the report is available in Spanish. I'll send it to you. The way WMO operates is through our members, and in this particular instance, the Brazilian National Meteorological Service, they've been very, very, very active indeed in issuing early warnings, regular updates, regular forecasts, which are then obviously used by federal and regional authorities in their disaster management. Our role at WMO is to try to strengthen the capacity of national meteorological services, such as in Brazil, to deliver these forecasts and to deliver these services. We are one of the leading players in the global Early Warnings for All initiative. And that really is to ensure that nobody's left behind, that, you know, the forecasts reach everybody who needs them, and that people can act on those forecasts. So this is a really major initiative. It's spearheaded by the UN Secretary General, and as I said, WMO, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the International Telecommunications Union, and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. We are all working together to try to push this forward. Obviously, the scale of the flooding in what we're seeing in Brazil now, it's absolutely horrific. But hopefully the fact that, you know, the early warnings were issued, they were made available, you know, hopefully that did, you know, help minimize the casualties. And any one life lost is one too many. But, you know, we hope by you know, forecast early warnings, we can keep, you know, the loss of life to a minimum.
Thank you very much, Claire. I see that both you might have your hand back up again. I mean, if there's something that you can maybe pose to Claire bilaterally, unless it's a.
Yeah,
go
just
ahead.
to follow up. So a clarification. So these early warning systems were non-existent, or they were, but they missed it because the scale of the damage gives you on the idea that there was no proper early warning system to evacuate people, or can you just quickly say something about the early warning systems, because how do they work? It's like the National Meteorological Services of that city or that city municipal has some sort of radar, sensors, whatever, satellites that are kind of capturing things around the globe that will impact that region in that specific moment. Is there a way that you can tell us why this seems that it has failed, this early warning system?
No, I disagree with that. The early warnings have been issued regularly, reliably, and repeatedly by the National Meteorological Service. They've been issuing the warnings. The forecasts have been spot on. They've issued another forecast today, warning of yet more heavy rain, to hit the areas. So the warnings are there. They are accurate. This is not the case in all parts of the world, which is why we've got the Early Warnings for All initiative. But certainly what we've been seeing in Brazil is that the National Meteorological and Hydrological Service really has done a tremendous job in issuing the forecasts and issuing the warnings. It's the scale of the scale of the disaster, the intensity of the rainfall, the fact that it's lasted for so long, that obviously makes disaster response very, very difficult. But the warnings are there. It's they've worked. They have worked.
Thank you very much. Bianca, a quick follow-up to a previous question, perhaps?
Yeah, thanks again, Rolando. I had a question to Claire, to Claire, that I think she didn't answer. It was regarding the forecast for today, because it's a lot of rain again. So if the forecast is confirmed, how bad can be the situation now? And last one, and I'm sorry I apologize to my colleagues because we are really into this story, Maya and I, but for Brazil, it's really, really a dramatic thing. The situation is very, very, very difficult. So if both Claire and William, if both of you can just give, it could be a small sentence, but just to compare this situation, this disaster in Brazil with other floods in the world, because just to give us a big picture of the intensity and the dramatic scale of what we are seeing now in Rio Grande do Sul. Thanks. I promise it's finished.
Okay, so for the forecast today, and I'm just reading from the forecast from the National Meteorological Service. They are the ones who are responsible. So according to the National Institute of Meteorology, it's important to note that the predicted rainfall volumes may cause new disturbances in areas already affected previously. And for this reason, INMET, which is the service, warns and recommends following the guidelines of the National Civil Defence. So they are making their forecasts, their warnings available to federal and to regional authorities, who are then responsible for the, any additional evacuation measures, any additional emergency planning measures. In terms of comparing it, it's on a massive scale. It's part of Brazil. If we look at what's been happening in East Africa, it's equally dramatic, for anybody who's caught up in this, anybody who loses, loved ones, who loses their livelihood, who loses their crops. You can't really say, well, it's worse what's happening in Brazil than East Africa. But in East Africa, when we see what happened in Kenya, and the Kenyan president last week said, no corner of Kenya is not affected by the scale of the flooding there. You see the small-scale farmers in East Africa who've lost everything. They've lost their livestock, they've lost their crops, they've lost everything. They've been displaced. Infrastructure has been washed away in Brazil and in East Africa. So it's a really dire emergency for anybody who's caught up, be it in Africa or be it in Brazil.
Okay, I'm going to allow one follow-up from Maya, and then we really need to end it. But unless this is something that you can pose to Claire or William bilaterally, is this a really quick follow-up for clarification?
Yes. Thank you
Go
very
ahead.
much, Orlando. Yes. They say that is on the scale of Katrina, the damage, the devastation that's happening in Porto Alegre. So that's something that perhaps most people are familiar what happened in Katrina. But what I would like to ask now is, you're saying the early warning systems were in place, they were given sufficient warnings. And how come people could not evacuate in time? Is because there are no systems in place. So this is a failure of the Brazilian government, or is also because it is somewhat a new incidents, right, that are happening more frequently, and that governments need to step up and prepare better for situations like this?
I don't think I would use the word failure for this particular case. From what I've seen, the Brazilian government did respond, very rapidly, very efficiently. It's just the scale of this, the scale of the magnitude of the disaster, which does make it very difficult. And as William said, there's not enough funding being put in sort of early warning systems, generally in climate adaptation, climate mitigation. But I think, it's, as the UN Secretary General says, when we are at war with nature, as we, are by constantly, adding more pollution to the atmosphere, then nature strikes back. And nature has, unfortunately, hit back in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Claire. Much appreciated. Thanks, colleagues, for your interesting questions on this important subject. Ed Harris of WIPO is with us, and thanks for your patience. Ed has an announcement on the diplomatic conference. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Orlando. Good morning, everyone. You will have received copious amounts of information from me about the upcoming diplomatic conference, which begins on Monday. So just a couple of logistical notes before everybody heads out for a nice sunny weekend. It begins at 10 a.m. here at WIPO. It will be webcast. You can find the link through our website. For anybody who wants to come over, please give me a call in advance and arrive as early as possible. There are 1,200 attendees who have indicated that they'll be arriving also on Monday morning. So we're expecting a capacity crowd. For folks who want to shoot inside, we can bring you in a bit, let you do some beauty shots, and of course you can do what you want on the premises. So just to say, please give me as much forewarning as possible, and I hope to see everybody on Monday morning. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Rolando.
Thanks to you, Ed, and thanks for those important notes. We do have oh, no, we don't have a question. We thought I had a question for you. Oh, we do have a question. Sorry, my short-sightedness. Antonio.
Just, Ed, I don't know if it's prepared among your amount of material, but we would like to see the program. Thank you.
Ed, yep. On the program.
Yeah, sorry, I got muted. Yeah, the program you can find through the website. There's a main page that has all the links. If you want, I can email it to you. There's an agenda you can find it through our meeting site. Give you a basic rundown of what's to be expected on the first few days. Michelle, I'll send that to you, no problem, right after we finish here.
Thanks, Ed. I suppose, Michelle, is that the same question on the program? Maybe another question? Go ahead. We can unmute Michelle.
Thank you. I was having trouble unmuting myself. I had another question about the list of participants. I don't know, do you have any sort of dignitaries that are going to be coming for this conference? And also, could you just tell us what we should expect regarding this new agreement that is being negotiated? Should we expect an adoption of the agreement? And if so, when? Thank you.
Let's let the last go first. So the diplomatic conference is scheduled between May 13th and 24th. So that's from this Monday to the following Friday. So it's the hope that, yes, there'll be some sort of signing ceremony on that final Friday, if not before. As for participants, there isn't a list that's been published, but we are expecting a number of government ministers from around the world. I can tell you about that bilaterally as it firms up. Right now, I can say there'll be a number are planning to attend.
Great, thanks, Ed, for that those notes. Any further questions for Ed? No. Okay. Thank you again for joining us, and good luck next week at the conference. Okay, just a couple of announcements from me before we wrap up. Firstly, to remind you, Secretary General Antonio Guterres is currently in Nairobi. He's there today and tomorrow. He's there attending a UN Civil Society conference, which is an important step towards the preparations for the Summit of the Future, which takes place in September of this year. Mr. Guterres is expected to deliver remarks at the conference's closing session this afternoon. It'll be webcast. He's also scheduled to do a press conference. I believe this is 2:15 today, our time. Mr. Guterres will be doing a press conference, which will be a webcast, of course. So do put that on your radar. Now, in terms of human rights meetings, we have 3 different committees, 2 underway and 1 starting next week. The Committee Against Torture is wrapping up its 79th session this afternoon after having reviewed the reports of Austria, Honduras, Azerbaijan, Liechtenstein, North Macedonia, and Finland. The Committee on the Rights of the Child had its session start this week, and it continues next week. Today, it's reviewing, this morning it's reviewing the report of Mali, and this afternoon it'll review a report of Panama under the optional protocol on the sale of children. And then lastly, next week, we have the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, otherwise known as CEDAW, which commences its 3-week session, during which it will review the following country reports: the Republic of Korea, Montenegro, Singapore, Estonia, Kuwait, Malaysia, Brazil, and Rwanda. You have a media advisory with all the information therein. And lastly, the Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review Working Group will conclude its 46th session this afternoon. after adopting the final reports for this session, namely for Eritrea, Vietnam, the Dominican Republic, and Cambodia. So you also have information on that, and maybe just mentioning that on the other side of the pond, we have the General Assembly this afternoon will convene its emergency special session on Israel OPT. This is to do with the membership of Palestine, and this is rather a bid for membership. And this is taking place at 10 a.m. New York time, so 4 p.m. our time. And of course, that's also webcast. That's it. That's all I have. Rather, any questions for me? No. In that case, have a good weekend and bon appetit.